Welcome everyone to my How to Make a Switch or the Switch Framework presentation. My name is Daniel Ryan. I unfortunately am unable to join you in class tonight due to some work travel. I have a board meeting this weekend and a conference as well, so I am on the road, so I am giving you this presentation from my hotel room. So I will go through the three different areas of the Switch Framework, which involves directing the rider, motivating the elephant, and shaping the path. And I will go through a specific criteria in each of those areas around a personal scenario that I actually went through. And that scenario that I went through was completing an Ironman race. I had a crazy goal in my life after seeing I was graduating from college, getting my undergraduate degree. I'd seen many mentors of mine who had completed an Ironman, and it seemed like a crazy goal that I really emulated the individuals who did that. And so I set out once I got into a little bit of these activities. I did just decide I'm going to dive in deep and I'm going to do this crazy race, which, if you're unfamiliar, consists of 2.4 miles of swimming, 112 miles of biking, and 26.2 miles of running, which if you're familiar with running is a marathon worth of running. So it's a big, hairy, audacious goal, and I set out upon college graduation for my undergraduate career to complete that challenge. So how did I go about doing that? My first focal point for the switch methodology that I want to focus on is how did I direct the rider, or direct the rider in this case. And the focal point that I want to focus on here is scripting the critical moves. So as I mentioned before, the Ironman is a huge race, a very long, day-long race, more or less, and it consists of three different activities, and the swimming, the biking, and the running. And I didn't just one day wake up and decide that, hey, I just want to go do this. That's nearly impossible, at least in my mind, to just wake up and want to go do this or finish that race for that matter. So I had already been running. I had a bike, and I was fairly adamant about running, and I set out to actually do a few marathons, which along the way I realized, like, hey, if I do these marathons, I will convince myself that I can do this Ironman. So it was really, I set out over about a 3 to 4 year time frame to actually do this race, and the building up part of it was scripting out, okay, if I do 3 marathons and I start to do these different bike races, all I got to do is start to handle, figure out these smaller steps that I can do to lead up to these this big race. And so I went and I searched out other people who were doing these things to help script these critical moves. And I did that by focusing on smaller races first to ultimately build me up to this Ironman. And so it kind of goes hand in hand with the next point that I'm going to get to, but you can see an image of me there. I'm running the Chicago Marathon there. That's my first ever marathon. And you can see, just for the sake of this picture, that's me and my mom, Dan Ryan, in front of the Dan Ryan after I completed that race. It was pretty cold, as you can tell. And then there's me with my father doing a biking race. That's a Century ride, completed a 100-mile ride there. Again, we planned out our critical moves based on some plans that some of our other coaches that we found online had already done these races. That's what we used to plan out our training there. And then here is me actually also completing a half Ironman, which again, this was me building up to the ultimate full Ironman. So I scripted out basically, again, these 3 to 5 year plan of the critical moves based on a plan that I had found previously of someone who had done exactly what I wanted to do. So that was me directing the rider, scripting the critical moves, which is the first part of this switch framework. So the second part I want to talk about is motivating the elephant, shrinking the change. As I mentioned, it's you can't just wake up and decide, hey, I'm going to go do this Ironman. That's a crazy. If you can, that's awesome, but I don't think professional athletes are able to do that. And so ultimately, you want to shrink the change, and that's what I did in this scenario. I started with just getting into running. I started in my undergraduate years. I started to gain some lbs, some pounds, and so what I did was I started running 5Ks just to get me used to running and lose some of that weight from cardio that way. Well, I started to realize, like, wow, I can run quite a bit of distance as I do this, and that kind of got me into the knack of, okay, well, maybe I can do some longer distance running and such. And that ultimately led me, that endurance training for running led me to this site called Training Peaks. So if anybody is familiar with long distance or endurance sports, they'll be familiar with Training Peaks, but that's ultimately a site where you can go find either training plans that have worked for people or coaches that are making those plans for you, or you can legitimately find coaches out there that want students, or in this case athletes, who are looking to complete these races. And so that's all the way from running 5Ks, 10Ks, up to marathons, as well as other endurance sports like swimming, biking, anything in between. And you can see on the screen the different sport that you want to select, as well as the weeks and the time frame you are able to devote to said sport. So that was really helpful for me because it helped me shrink the change. Instead of me thinking about, oh, I've got to run 26.2 miles in one sitting, instead I'm talking about, oh, I can just go run 3 to 5 miles on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then I just have to do this 1.5 hour of swimming on Tuesday. Really compartmentalize the change. So for me, it was taking this grandiose scale goal and really shrinking it down, enabling me to be successful in that way. So shrinking the change was the second part of the switch framework. And finally, the third part was shaping the path for this Ironman scenario, or this Ironman goal. And what I want to focus on here is rallying the herd. And so you can see, just like losing weight, just like any other athletic activity, having a group of constituents that you can rely on and just lean on to help get you through this challenge, whatever the case may be, is supremely important in making a change. And that's what I wanted to focus on with this portion of the Shaping the Path segment of the switch framework, and rallying the herd. And so that group that you can see there was really my herd. That was my I had a personal coach who lives out in Collierville, and she is a part of the Memphis Thunder racing team. You can see that group there. I somehow am not in this. I'm in the back of the picture. Unfortunately, you can't see me, but that's the best picture I had to go off of. But I was in swimming classes with these folks. I was, whenever I was out in Collierville, I would go on bike rides with these folks because we'd have group rides, which really made it a lot more conducive to wanting to do these things. And then I was also running occasionally with this group of people as well. So it was really, rallying the herd really pushed me to want to make this change. And it was really an accountability buddy, if you will, to help me hold myself accountable. So that third part of shaping the path to complete this Ironman was rallying the herd. And so, as I mentioned, you saw really the three different parts of the switch framework that I focused on to complete an Ironman race, focused on directing the rider, which for me was scripting the critical moves. The second was motivating the elephant by shrinking the change down to where it was something that I could actually manage on a day-to-day basis. And then third was rallying the herd, which, as you just saw, was that Memphis Thunder racing team that really gave me that support group that I needed. And so in the long run, me setting out to complete this Ironman race, I was ultimately successful. And as you can see, there's me at the finish line. As I was coming up to that finish, I was hurt, and I'd gotten actually injured during the final marathon portion of the race when I was running. I'd swam 2.4 miles. I biked 112, and then as I was running, I got an injury along the way. But when I was just about a mile from the end, there was a guy telling, or zero point 0.6 miles from the end, there was a guy telling me, "You're 140 miles are behind you. You've got 0.6 miles left." And so that was able to push through. I was able to push through the pain and get to the end, and you can see me finishing that Ironman there. And so, while I may not have known about the switch framework at that point in time, I definitely used it again to direct the rider by scripting the critical moves, motivating the elephant by shrinking the change, and shaping the path by rallying the herd with Memphis Thunder. And I was successful in being able to complete my Ironman race. So that may be the first. Hopefully it's not the last, but ultimately I was able to make that switch and be successful with my Ironman race. So miss you all in class, but that is my switch framework presentation. I hope you enjoyed, and if you have any questions, unfortunately I'm not going to be able to call in for class, but please feel free to email me at dryan1@memphis.edu, or I will catch you at the next class. Thank you all.